Okie dokie. Hello, darlings. Hello. Good to see you. This is Tad. I'm still here. I am still bearing the burden of Tadhood. Lovely to have you with me. It is now 1 o'clock in the morning here in Northern California, as we call it, even though it's kind of right smack dab in the middle of the state. But apparently, anything much north of Los Angeles is considered Northern California. That's always irritated me. But anyway, doesn't matter. This is, as mentioned before, this is me. I'm here. I'm glad to have you all here with me. I'm going to be reading tonight, and I will tell you more about that in just a moment. In the interim, while I'm waiting for everybody to show up, I will just tell you what's been going on, some of which I alluded to last week. And I have finished Navigator's Children. It is out of my hands. It is slated, as you know, for a November publication, and everything the is on the up for that happening. Especially thanks to all the help that I got from Ron and Ilva, Angela, Jeremy, and Isaac in getting the book prepared for publication. So, as always, I am grateful to them. So anyway, that's gone. I just finished signing 1,500 tip-in sheets. Tip-in sheets, for those of you who don't know, are separate pieces of paper that you sign individually, and then they get bound into the book. So when you're doing a pre-scheduled special edition book, instead of them sending you all the books and having you send them, which is expensive and time consuming and hard to find a place to store 1,500 books, then they send you a pile of pages about yay high. It's actually, I'll tell you, it's almost exactly the height of the manuscript of To Green Angel Tower, because people used to send me pictures of that manuscript, and it's about that because that was 1,600 pages and this was 1,500 pages, but they're all the same page, the title page that I signed, every single dang one of them. So while I'm always very pleased that anybody wants a special edition with my signature on them, so it's a lot of work signing 1,500 pages, and you almost have to be doing something else at the time, because otherwise it's so crushingly boring just signing your name over and over again. Plus, and this is really a Tad and Deborah kind of thing, in our household, you'd think, hey, we're writers, we're artists, our daughter's an artist, you'd think we just have writing and drawing implements everywhere, and we do have a few, but what we had almost nothing of was proper pens to sign tip-in sheets with. So I would get like 200 sheets in and then find my pen running out of ink, and then have to go up and literally like open boxes all downstairs here and all over the house to find another pen, and then use that one, and then that would start to run out of ink. And so I had to keep going on these pathetic quests to find a working black pen. So I think that there's actually one page that got signed in blue, and there are a number of other pages where it changes from a felt tip pen to a rolling ball pen to a regular ballpoint pen, stuff like that. But it's all my signature, so if that's what people want, they'll get that. They just will. If you compare them, you'll see that they're slightly different pens. But I don't think anybody's going to actually get together and compare them, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that tangent. So I am waiting to be able to wade back into the Ordinary Farm Part 3, which still has one last polished draft to go through after consulting with Deborah, who had a shockingly small amount of suggestions to make. So that always worries me. I'm like, I thought it worked well. I thought it moved fast, but I don't like to get overconfident. But she didn't really have much to say. She said, this part needs to be tightened up a little bit, and this, you didn't go back and explain what happened to this. And I went, yeah, you're right. So that's what I'm going to be doing at some point. But at the moment, I'm also, having just finished the signing things, I'm also trying to go through slides, my parents' old slide collection, because of course that's the era that we were from, where you had everything in carousels of photo slides. This pre-digital. I mean, my parents both lived into the digital age, but we never got around to putting all the slides into digital format. In fact, most of them were not. So, as my very small contribution to the celebration of life that we're doing, I'm going through the slides and pulling out suitable pictures and saving basically all the good family pictures, because my dad, bless him, was really good at taking pictures of like buildings and mountains. But when he was taking pictures of people, oftentimes he'd get the entire facade of, like Blenheim Palace, which is it's the gigantic castle basically, although it's post castle. So it doesn't have a defensive wall or anything. But I mean, it's this gigantic house that was given to Winston Churchill's ancestor when he won the Battle of Marlborough. And because of that battle, he became the Duke of Marlborough. And he was given Blenheim Palace. So, but anyway, so my dad had a tendency to like get all of Blenheim Palace into the picture frame. And that means the people are like these tiny little ant-like things down in the front, which is fine when you're going back as a family and looking at pictures to remember a trip or remember an important moment. But when you're trying to find good pictures of your parents and things like that to use in a situation like this, it's not much use. Fortunately, there were enough pictures that and we had already done some work on that. So that's done. And then I still have to write something to read at my parents'. We're calling it a celebration of life. It's not the funeral. We already had the funerals. Obviously, my mom died almost 2 years ago now, and my dad last summer. So, but it is a celebration. They were two extraordinary and wonderful people, and so I want to write something to read at it that is meaningful. So I've still got that on my plate as well, and then I'll also get to Ordinary Farm. And at some point, I will be able to start the next book. And I will also finish up with The Office, which, as you have noticed, is got fewer boxes than it used to, but there's still more. And then I still have to do everything else, furniture and put pictures back up on the walls. So that's my update. So before I start explaining what I am going to be doing next, and specifically what I'm going to be doing tonight, let me just check in and see if anybody has shown up. Yes, I see a few people are here already, and that is good. I see Nicole. Nicole has already dropped in. Kristen is here. Ilva, hello, darling. Suzanne is checking in from Yorkshire. And let me see who else has checked in yet. Wouter is here. And Petra and Christina, hello, hello. Rosalba is here. Nikki is here. Jerry. I know no Jerry. I know Mr. Unangst. And Iris and Isaac, hello. And Maria Jose. And I already said hello to Nicole. Hello, Nicole. Chenoa, Carol, Christy, and Penny, and Mark. Mark is checking in also from Yorkshire, or at least that's where Mark usually checks in from. So, all right. So now I checked the comments from last week on both, what's the word I'm looking for? Both broadcasts, I guess, for lack of a better term, since it wasn't a reading last week. And there was definitely a trend, and the trend was, we don't need to hear the second books of any of your series, which I understand. No, nobody said it that way. It was all very nice, but they said, oh, it'd be nice to hear you read some other kinds of things, maybe some other people's work. Oh, it'd be fun to hear some other writers that you like, et cetera, et cetera. So I am, after considering all of that, I am deciding I'm going to go ahead for certain with reading other science fiction writers that influenced me or that were favorites of mine. And I may also read some kids' books at some point. I haven't got a plan on that, although I think I would like to read The Wind in the Willows, not just because it's a really well-written and very fine book, which it is, but because I'm at this point in my life. That was a major connection with my mom and I. And in fact, in her last days in the hospital, I brought a copy in and read some to her when she was awake and could, listen and enjoy it. Because it was a favorite of both of ours. And it was also a book that really kind of launched me on my way when I was young, because she read it to me, but we definitely enjoyed it together. It was very much a thing. So I may read The Wind in the Willows at some point, but that's not what I'm reading tonight. What I am going to read tonight is a story from one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite science fiction stroke fantasy writers. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, I think I've mentioned in the past, but not in this particular context with a specific writer. Most of my favorite writers that I grew up really admiring and enjoying, and who spoke to me in a deep and significant way, were known as science fiction writers, but in fact, they kind of slid in and out between science fiction and fantasy. And as people who've read my short stories know, I tend to do both of those things. I'll write stories sometimes that are technically science fiction, many others that are fantasy. Some of them are explicitly horror stories. Some of them are just things that amused me and interested me. But there was less pressure commercially in those days, because science fiction and fantasy were, both kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They were poor step cousins of real literature. And in fact, the writer I'm reading tonight made a kind of classic comment about that, which I'll mention in a moment. But anyway, so a lot of the writers that I'm going to be reading stories from in the next few months, or whatever we do, are going to be people that kind of slide in and out from science fiction and fantasy, in part because there was not as much restriction in those days. If you were, there were a few magazines that were very much, it has to be science. It has to be science fiction. It has to be what we would now call hard science. But most of these writers didn't hold themselves to that. I mean, Bradbury and Ursula Le Guin and Roger Zelazny, and a lot of these people, they could write hard science fiction, but a lot of times they stretched, or the genres were permeable and it kind of slid back and forth, or they weren't that interested in the science part because they were writing about the people involved. And tonight's story is definitely one of those kinds of things. So, not to keep you on tenterhooks, but the story that I want to read tonight is by T.Sturgeon. It's a story called Slow Sculpture. Let me tell you quickly a little bit about Ted Sturgeon, who is certainly, one of the leading lights of science fiction that I grew up with, and is still considered to be one of the greats in the field. Although, as with everything, people get reassessed and new generations come along and they want to put their stamp on things and decide, what's actually good and what isn't good anymore and all that. So I couldn't say what exactly the current consensus, if there is any, on Ted Sturgeon. But for my money, he's always been one of the most interesting writers of his generation. He was born in 1918, Staten Island, I believe. And he was somebody who did a lot of things. His father didn't want him to go to college, as I recall, and kind of basically sent him out into the world to earn his own way. And what I do know for certain is that he spent a great deal of his early life kind of doing many different things. He was in the Merchant Marines. He had lots of different jobs, which of course is something very familiar to me. He was in the military, and there is a certain way, as with other writers of that era who were in and around the Second World War, that it definitely obviously affected their work and influenced what they wrote about and how they wrote. Heinlein being one of the most obvious examples, Robert Heinlein, who, wrote Starship Troopers, Stranger in a Strange Land, Glory Road, all this very famous stuff. Heinlein was of a fairly military turn of mind. Sturgeon was not. Although, as you'll see even in this story, he's also still a product of his generation in ways, although he was moving away from it and questioning a lot of the certainties of male-female relationships, the certainties of gender. Not so much in this story, you won't see that. But certainly as his career progressed, he was one of the first people predating the new wave of science fiction in the mid-late 70s. He had already kind of begun to ask a lot of questions, and he influenced a lot of the people who really did change what was the norm for science fiction. He also, for those of you who have ever heard this expression, he also coined, as far as we know, there's some debate about this, but he definitely coined something that came to be known as Sturgeon's Law. And the story that I heard, and again, these things are all kind of like samizdat in the old Soviet Union, they get passed around, and I can't swear to you that this is the exact way it happened, but the story that I heard was that he was on a panel or at some kind of literary gathering with Mary McCarthy, a writer who wrote some very famous books in the 50s, more of a mainstream writer. And she said to him something along the lines of, you know, Ted, you're so smart and you know so many things and you write really well, and I don't understand why you're writing science fiction. 90% of science fiction is just crap. And Sturgeon reportedly said, Mary, 90% of everything is crap. And that became what was later known as Sturgeon's Law. And it is, but it was brought up in part because there is this kind of misunderstanding. What he was saying is 90% of literary fiction is crap too. It's just that nobody buys it, so you never hear about it. And this is something I've said many times too. You're comparing apples and oranges. If you compare the best science fiction to the best literary fiction, there's not much difference between the writing, the quality of the writing, the quality of the ideas. Anyway, so Ted Sturgeon, born 1918, did most of his writing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, although he continued to publish into the 70s, but not so many short stories. He was tending to work more on novels then, wrote More Than Human, which is maybe his most famous work. Also, last thing before we start, also very well known for writing one of the most famous Star Trek episodes ever, called Amok Time, which was where in the second season of Star Trek, where Mr. Spock goes off the rails, begins behaving very strangely, and it is discovered that it's because it's his mating time, and he is supposed to go back to Vulcan and get married. And but there's a whole kind of weird sexual rut, or like elephants, like must, that male elephants go into. There's a whole kind of craziness to this Vulcan sexuality that really springs out a lot of new things, and many people consider it to be maybe the best Star Trek episode ever. It also was the one, and Sturgeon, who wrote it, coined "Live Long and Prosper," and I believe also the famous greeting as well, but I'm not 100% certain about that. But he definitely, "Live Long and Prosper" first occurred in Amok Time, and Sturgeon was credited as the only writer, so I think he has to get credit for that. Anyway, so I don't know how long the story is going to last. I may finish it tonight. I may finish it right up at the deadline, end of the hour, or I may have to carry it over, or I may have some extra time. If I have some extra time, I will talk a little bit about some of the reasons why Sturgeon's work affected me, and some kind of editorial or critical comments about it, not critical in the sense of negative, but critical in the sense of analytical. But before that, I am going to go ahead and start the story and see how far we get with it. And again, the story is called Slow Sculpture. It actually won, I think, either the Hugo or the Nebula or both, which are the sort of Academy Awards of science fiction. Something I have never won, nor even been nominated for. But that's another grievance for another day. Anyway, no, I should have never been nominated for a Hugo or a Nebula. World Fantasy Award, maybe, but that hasn't happened either. Anyway, so this is a story was published originally in 1970. And again, it's called Slow Sculpture, and I will just read it to you, and then we'll go from there. She didn't know who he was when she met him. Well, not many people did. He was in the high orchard doing something under a pear tree. The land smelled of late summer and wind. Bronze. It smelled bronze. He looked up at a compact girl in her mid-20s with a fearless face and eyes the same color as her hair, which was extraordinary because her hair was red gold. She looked down at a leather-skinned man in his 40s with a gold-leaf electroscope in his hand and felt she was an intruder. She said, "Oh," in what was apparently the right way because he nodded once and said, "Hold this." And there could be no thought of intrusion. There could then be no thought of intrusion. She knelt down by him and took the instrument, holding it just where he positioned her hand, and then he moved a little away and struck a tuning fork against his kneecap. "What's it doing?" He had a good voice, the kind of voice strangers notice and listen to. She looked at the delicate leaves of gold in the glass shield of the electroscope. "They're moving apart." He struck the tuning fork again, and the leaves pressed away from one another. "Much?" "About 45 degrees when you hit the fork." "Good. That's about the most we'll get." From a pocket of his bush jacket, he drew a sack of chalk dust and dropped a small handful on the ground. "I'll move now. You stay right there and tell me how much the leaves separate." He traveled around the pear tree in a zigzag course, striking his tuning fork while she called out numbers. 10 degrees, 35, 20, nothing. Whenever the gold foil pressed apart to maximum, 40 degrees or more, he dropped more chalk. When he was finished, the tree was surrounded in a rough oval by the white dots of chalk. He took out a notebook and diagrammed them and the tree and put away the book and took the electroscope out of her hands. "Were you looking for something?" he asked her. "No," she said. "Yes." He could smile. Though it did not last long, she found it very surprising in a face like that. That's not what is called in a court of law a responsive answer. She glanced across the hillside, metallic in the late light. There wasn't much on it. Rocks, weeds the summer was done with, a tree or so, and then the orchard. Anyone present had come a long way to get here. "It wasn't a simple question," she said, tried to smile, and burst into tears. She was sorry and said so. "Why?" he asked. This was the first time she was to experience this ask the next question thing of his. It was unsettling. It always would be, never less, sometimes a great deal more. "Well, one doesn't have emotional explosions in public." "You do. I don't know this one you're talking about." I guess I don't either, now that you mention it." "Tell the truth, then. No sense in going round and round about it. He'll think that and the like. I'll think what I think, whatever you say, or go on down the mountain and just don't say any more." She did not turn to go, so he added, "Try the truth, then. If it's important, it's simple. And if it's simple, it's easy to say." "I'm going to die," she cried. "So am I." "I have a lump in my breast." "Come up to the house and I'll fix it." Without another word, he turned away and started through the orchard. Startled half out of her wits, indignant and full of insane hope, experiencing even a quick curl of astonished laughter, She stood for a moment watching him go, and then found herself, at what point did I decide, running after him. She caught up with him on the uphill margin of the orchard. "Are you a doctor?" He appeared not to notice that she had waited, had run. "No," he said, and walking on, appeared not to see her stand again, pulling on her lower lip, then run again to catch up. "I must be out of my mind," she said, joining him on a garden path. She said it to herself, which he must have known, because he did not answer. The garden was alive with defiant chrysanthemums, and a pond in which she saw the flicker of a pair of red-cap imperials, silver, not gold, fish, which were the largest she had ever seen. Then the house. First it was part of the garden, with its colonnaded terrace, and then with its rock walls, too big to be called fieldstone, part of the mountain. It was on and in the hillside, and its roofs paralleled the skylines, front and sides, and part of it was backed against an out-jutting cliff face. The door, beamed and studded, and with 2 archers' slits, was open for them. But there was no one there, and when it closed it was silent, a far more solid exclusion of things outside than any click or clang of latch or bolt. She stood with her back against it, watching him cross what seemed to be the central well of the house, or at least this part of it. It was a kind of small court, in the center of which was an atrium, glazed on all its 5 sides and open to the sky. Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself back in focus here. Focus, focus, focus. It doesn't want to do it. I don't know why. It was a kind of small court, in the center of which was an atrium, glazed on all its 5 sides, and open to the sky at the top. In it was a tree, a cypress or juniper, gnarled and twisted, and with the turned back, paralleled, sculptured appearance of what the Japanese call bonsai. "Aren't you coming?" he called, holding open a door behind the atrium. "Bonsai just aren't 15 feet tall," she said. "This one is." She came by it slowly, looking. "How long have you had it?" His tone of voice said he was immensely pleased. It is a clumsiness to ask the owner of a bonsai how old it is. You are then demanding to know if it is his work or if he has acquired and continued the concept of another. You are tempting him to claim for his own the concept and the meticulous labor of someone else, and it becomes rude to tell a man he is being tested. Hence, "How long have you had it?" is polite, forbearing, profoundly courteous. He answered, "Half my life." She looked at the tree. Trees can be found, sometimes not quite discarded, not quite forgotten, potted in rusty gallon cans in not quite successful nurseries, unsold because they are shaped oddly or have dead branches here and there, or because they have grown too slowly in whole or part. These are the ones which develop interesting trunks and a resistance to misfortune that makes them flourish if given the least excuse for living. This one was far older than half this man's life, or all of it. Looking at it, she was terrified by the unbidden thought that a fire, a family of squirrels, some subterranean worm or termite could end this beauty. Something working outside any concept of rightness or justice or respect. She looked at the tree. She looked at the man. "Coming?" "Yes," she said, and went with him into his laboratory. "Sit down over there and relax," he told her. "This might take a little while." Over there was a big leather chair by the bookcase. The books were right across the spectrum: reference works in medicine and engineering, nuclear physics, chemistry, biology, psychiatry, Also, tennis, gymnastics, chess, the Oriental war game, Go, and golf. And then drama, the techniques of fiction, modern English usage, the American language, and supplement, Woods and Walker's rhyming dictionaries, and an array of other dictionaries and encyclopedias. A whole long shelf of biographies. You have quite a library. He answered her rather shortly. Clearly, he did not want to talk just now, for he was very busy. He said only, "Yes, I have. Perhaps you'll see it sometime," which left her to pick away at his words to find out what on earth he meant by them. He could only have meant, she decided, that the books beside her chair were what he kept handy for his work, that his real library was elsewhere. She looked at him with a certain awe, and she watched him. She liked the way he moved, swiftly, decisively. Clearly, he knew what he was doing. He used some equipment that she recognized, a glass still, titration equipment, a centrifuge. There were 2 refrigerators, one of which was not a refrigerator at all, for she could see the large indicator on the door. It stood at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. It came to her that a modern refrigerator is perfectly adaptable to the demand for a controlled environment, even a warm one. But all that, and the equipment she did not recognize, was only furniture. It was the man who was worth watching, the man who kept her occupied, so that not once in all the long time she sat there was she tempted toward the bookshelves. At last he finished a long sequence at the bench, threw some switches, picked up a tall stool, and came over to her. He perched on the stool, hung his heels on the cross spoke, and laid a pair of long brown hands over his knees. "Scared?" "I suppose I am." "You don't have to stay." "Considering the alternative," she began bravely, but the courage sound somehow oozed out. "It can't matter much." "Very sound," he said, almost cheerfully. "I remember when I was a kid, there was a fire scare in the apartment house where we lived. It was a wild scramble to get out, and my 10-year-old brother found himself outside in the street with an alarm clock in his hand. It was an old one, and it didn't work. But of all the things in the place he might have snatched up at a time like that, it turned out to be the clock. He's never been able to figure out why." "Have you?" "Not why he picked that particular thing, no. But I think I know why he did something obviously irrational. You see, panic is a very special state. Like fear and flight, or fury and attack, it's a pretty primitive reaction to extreme danger. It's one of the expressions of the will to survive. What makes it so special is that it's irrational. Now, why would the abandonment of reason be a survival mechanism?" She thought about this seriously. There was that about this man which made serious thought imperative. "I can't imagine," she said finally, "unless it's because in some situations reason just doesn't work." "You can imagine," he said, again radiating that huge approval, making her glow. "And you just did. If you are in danger and you try reason, and reason doesn't work, you abandon it. You can't say it's unintelligent to abandon what doesn't work, right? So then you are in panic, and then you start to perform random acts. Most of them, far and away most, will be useless. Some might even be dangerous, but that doesn't matter. You're in danger already. Where the survival factor comes in is that away down deep, you know that one chance in a million is better than no chance at all. So, here you sit. You're scared and you could run. Something says you should run, but you won't." She nodded. He went on. "You found a lump. You went to a doctor and he made some tests and gave you the bad news. Maybe you went to another doctor and he confirmed it. You then did some research and found out what was to happen next. The exploratory, the radical, the questionable recovery, a whole long, agonizing procedure of being what they call a terminal case. You then flipped out. Did some things you hope I won't ask you about. Took a trip somewhere, anywhere, wound up in my orchard for no reason. He spread the good hands and let them go back to their kind of sleep. Panic. The reason for little boys in their pajamas standing at midnight with a broken alarm clock in their arms, and for the existence of quacks. Something chimed over on the bench, and he gave her a quick smile and went back to work, saying over his shoulder, "I'm not a quack, by the way. To qualify as a quack, you have to claim to be a doctor. I don't." She watched him switch off, switch on, stir, measure, and calculate. A little orchestra of equipment chorused and soloed around him as he conducted, whirring, hissing, clicking, flickering. She wanted to laugh, to cry, and to scream. She did no one of these things for fear of not stopping ever. When he came over again, the conflict was not raging within her, but exerting steady and opposed tensions. The result was a terrible stasis, and all she could do when she saw the instrument in his hand was to widen her eyes. She quite forgot to breathe. "Yes, it's a needle," he said, his tone almost bantering. "A long, shiny, sharp needle. Don't tell me you're one of those needle-shy people." He nipped the long power cord which trailed from the black housing around the hypodermic to get some slack, and straddled the stool. "Want something to steady your nerves?" She was afraid to speak. The membrane containing her sane self was very thin, stretched very tight. He said, "I'd rather you didn't, because this pharmaceutical stew is complex enough as it is, but if you need it." She managed to shake her head a little, and again she felt the wave of approval from him. There were 1,000 questions she wanted to ask, had meant to ask, needed to ask. What was in the needle? How many treatments must she have? What would they be like? How long must she stay? And where? And most of all, could she live? Could she live? He seemed concerned with the answer to only one of these. "It's mostly built around an isotope of potassium. If I told you all I know about it and how I came on it in the first place, it would take, well, more time than we've got. But here's the general idea. Theoretically, every atom is electrically balanced. Never mind ordinary exceptions. Likewise, all electrical charges in the molecule are supposed to be balanced. So much plus, so much minus, total zero. I happened on the fact that the balance of charges in a wild cell is not zero. Not quite. It's as if there was a submicroscopic thunderstorm going on at the molecular level, with little lightning bolts flashing back and forth and changing the signs, interfering with communications, static. And that, he said, gesturing with the shielded hypo in his hand, is what this is all about. When something interferes with communications, especially the RNA mechanism, which says, read this blueprint and build accordingly, and stop when it's done, when that message gets garbled, lopsided things get built. Off-balance things, things which do almost what they should, do it almost right. They're wild cells, and the message they pass on are even worse. Okay, whether these thunderstorms are caused by viruses or chemicals or radiation or physical trauma or even anxiety, and don't think anxiety can't do it. That's secondary. The important thing is to fix it so the thunderstorm can't happen. If you can do that, the cells have plenty of ability all by themselves to repair and replace what's gone wrong. And biological systems aren't like ping pong balls with static charges, waiting for the charge to leak away or to discharge into a grounded wire. They have a kind of resilience, I call it forgiveness, which enables them to take on a little more charge or a little less and do all right. Well then, say a certain clump of cells is wild, and say it carries an aggregate of 100 units extra on the positive side. Cells immediately around it are affected, but not the next layer or the next. If they could be opened to the extra charge, if they could help to drain it off, they would, well, cure the wild cells of the surplus. You see what I mean? And they would be able to handle that little overage themselves, or pass it on to other cells and still others who could deal with it. In other words, if I can flood your body with some medium which can drain off and distribute a concentration of this unbalanced charge, the ordinary bodily processes will be free to move in and clear up the wild cell damage. And that's what I have here. He held the shielded needle between his knees, and from a side pocket of his lab coat, he took a plastic box, opened it, and drew out an alcohol swab. Still cheerfully talking, he took her terror-numbed arm and scrubbed at the inside of her elbow. I'm not for 1 second implying that nuclear charges in the atom are the same thing as static electricity. They're in a different league altogether. But the analogy holds. I could use another analogy. I could liken the charge on the wild cells to accumulations of fat and this gunk of mine to a detergent, which would break it up and spread it so far it couldn't be detected anymore. But I'm led to the static analogy by an odd side effect. Organisms injected with this stuff do build up one hell of a static charge. It's a byproduct, and for reasons I can only theorize about at the moment, it seems to be keyed to the audio spectrum. Tuning forks and the like. That's what I was playing with when I met you. That tree is drenched with this stuff. It used to have a whorl of wild cell growth. It hasn't anymore. He gave her the quick, surprising smile and let it click away as he held the needle point upward and squirted it. With his other hand wrapped around her left bicep, he squeezed gently and firmly. The needle was lowered and placed and slid into the big vein so deftly that she gasped, not because it hurt, but because it did not. Attentively, he watched the bit of glass barrel protruding from a black housing as he withdrew the plunger a fraction and saw the puff of red into the colorless fluid inside, and then he bore steadily on the plunger again. Please don't move. I'm sorry, this will take a little time. I have to get quite a lot of this into you. Which is fine, you know, he said, resuming the tone of his previous remarks about audio spectra. Because side effect or no, it's consistent. Healthy biosystems develop a strong electrostatic field. Unhealthy ones a weak one, or none at all. With an instrument as primitive and simple as that little electroscope, you can tell if any part of the organism has a community of wild cells, and if so, where it is, how big, and how wild. Deftly, he shifted his grip on the encased hypodermic without moving the point or varying the amount of plunger pressure. It was beginning to be uncomfortable, an ache turning into a bruise. And if you're wondering why this mosquito has a housing on it with a wire attached, although I bet you're not, and that you know as well as I do that I'm doing all this talking just to keep your mind occupied, I'll tell you. It's nothing but a coil carrying a high-frequency alternating current. The alternating field sees to it that the fluid is magnetically and electrostatically neutral, right from the start. He withdrew the needle suddenly and smoothly, bent her arm, and trapped in the inside of her elbow a cotton swab. Nobody ever told me that before or after a treatment, she said. What? No charge, she said. Again that wave of approval, this time with words. I like your style. How do you feel? She cast about for accurate phrases. like the owner of a large sleeping hysteria, begging someone not to wake it up. He laughed. In a little while, you are going to feel so weird you won't have time for hysteria. He got up and returned the needle to the bench, looping up the cable as he went. He turned off the AC field and returned with a large glass bowl and a square of plywood. He inverted the bowl on the floor near her and placed the wood on its broad base. I remember something like that, she said. When I was in junior high school, they were generating artificial lightning with a... Let me see. Well, it had a long, endless belt running over pulleys and some little wires scraping on it and a big copper ball on top. Van de Graaff generator. Right. And they did all sorts of things with it, but what I especially remember is standing on a piece of wood, on a bowl, like that. And they charged me up with the generator, and I didn't feel much of anything except all my hair stood out from my head. Everyone laughed. They said I was carrying 40,000 volts. Good. I'm glad you remember that. This'll be a little different, though, by roughly another 40,000. Oh, don't worry. Long as you're insulated and as long as grounded or comparatively grounded objects, me, for example, stay well away from you, there won't be any fireworks. Are you going to use a generator like that? Not like that, and I already did. You're the generator. Oh! She had raised her hand from the upholstered chair arm, and there was a crackle of sparks and the faint smell of ozone. Oh, you sure are, and more than I thought, and quicker. Get up. She started up slowly. She finished the maneuver with speed. As her body separated from the chair, she was, for a fractional second, seated in a tangle of spitting blue-white threads. They, or she, propelled her 1.5 yards away, standing. Literally shocked, half out of her wits, she almost fell. Stay on your feet, he snapped, and she recovered, gasping. He stepped back a pace. Get up on the board, quick, now. She did as she was told, leaving, for the 2 paces she traveled, 2 brief footprints of fire. She teetered on the board. Visibly, her hair began to stir. What's happening to me? She cried. You're getting charged after all, he said jovially, but at this point she failed to appreciate the extension of even her own witticism. She cried again, What's happening to me? It's all right, he said consolingly. He went to the bench and turned on a tone generator. It moaned deep in the 1 to 300 cycle range. He increased the volume and turned the pitch control. It howled upward, and as it did so, her red-gold hair shivered and swept up and out, each hair attempting frantically to get away from all the others. He ran the tone up above 10,000 cycles and all the way back to a belly-bumping inaudible 11. At the extremes, her hair slumped, but around 1100 it stood out. He turned down the gain to a more or less bearable level and picked up the electroscope. He came toward her, smiling. You are an electroscope, you know that? And a living Van de Graaff generator as well. Let me down, was all she could say. Not yet. Please hang tight. The differential between you and everything else is so high that if you got near any of it, you'd discharge into it. It wouldn't harm you. It isn't current electricity, but you might get a burn and a nervous shock out of it. He held out the electroscope. Even at that distance, and in her distress, she could see the gold leaves writhe apart. He circled her, watching the leaves attentively, moving the instrument forward and back and from side to side. Once he went to the tone generator and turned it down some more. You're sending such a strong field, I can't pick up the variations, he explained, and returned to her, closer now. I can't. Much more. I can't, she murmured. He did not hear, or he did not care. He moved the electroscope near her abdomen, up and from side to side. "Yep, there you are," he said cheerfully, moving the instrument close to her right breast. "What?" she whimpered. "Your cancer. Right breast, low, around toward the armpit." He whistled. "A mean one, too. Malignant as hell." She swayed and then collapsed forward and down. A sick blackness swept down on her, receded explosively in a glare of agonizing blue-white, and then crashed down on her like a mountain falling. Place where wall meets ceiling. Another wall, another ceiling. Hadn't seen it before. Didn't matter. Don't care. Sleep. Place where wall meets ceiling. Something in the way. His face, close, drawn, tired. Eyes awake, though, and penetrating. Doesn't matter. Don't care. Sleep. Place where wall meets ceiling. Down a bit, late sunlight. Over a little rusty gold chrysanthemums in a gold-green glass cornucopia. Something in the way again, his face. "Can you hear me?" "Yes, but don't answer. Don't move. Don't speak. Sleep." It's a room, a wall, a table, a man pacing. A nighttime window and mums you'd think were alive, but don't you know they're cut right off and dying? Do they know that? "How are you?" Urgent, urgent. "Thirsty." Cold and a bite to it that aches the hinges of the jaws. Grapefruit juice. Lying back on his arm while he holds the glass in another hand. "Oh no, that's not. Thank you. Thanks very. Try to sit up. The sheet. My clothes." "Sorry about that," he said, the mind reader almost. Some things that have to be done just aren't consistent with pantyhose and a mini dress. All washed and dried and ready for you, though, any time. Over there. The brown wool and the pantyhose and the shoes on the chair. He's respectful, standing back, putting the glass next to an insulated carafe on the night table. "What things?" "Throwing up. Bedpans," he said candidly. "Protective with the sheet, which can hide bodies, but, oh, not embarrassment." "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I must have." Shake head, and he slides back and forth in the vision. You went into shock, and then you just didn't come out of it. He hesitated. It was the first time she had ever seen him hesitate over anything. She became, for a moment, an almost mind reader. "Should I tell her what's in my mind?" Sure, he should, and he did. "You didn't want to come out of it." "It's all gone out of my head." The pear tree, the electroscope, the injection, the electrostatic response. "No," she said, not knowing. Then, knowing. "No!" "Hang on," he rapped, and the next thing she knew, he was by the bed, over her, his two hands hard on her cheeks. "Don't slip off again. You can handle it. You can handle it because it's all right now. Do you understand that? You're all right. You told me I had cancer." It sounded pouty, accusing. He laughed at her, actually laughed. "You told me you had it." "Oh, but I didn't know." "That explains it," he said in a load off my back tone. "Because there wasn't anything in what I did that could cause a 3-day withdrawal like that. It had to be something in you." 3 days? He simply nodded in response to that and went on with what he was saying. I get a little pompous once in a while, he said engagingly. Comes from being right so much of the time. Took a bit more for granted than I should have, didn't I? When I assumed you'd been to a doctor, maybe even had a biopsy. You didn't, did you? I was afraid, she admitted. She looked at him. My mother died of it, and my aunt and my sister had a radical mastectomy. I couldn't bear it, and when I told you what you already knew and what you never wanted to hear, you couldn't take it. You blacked right out, Fainted away, and it had nothing to do with the 70-odd thousand volts of static you were carrying. I caught you. He put out his arms, and instinctively she shrank back, but he held the arms where they were, on display, until she looked at them and saw the angry red scorch marks on his forearms and the heavy biceps, as much of them as she could see from under his short-sleeved shirt. About 9/10 knocked me out, too, he said, but at least you didn't crack your head or anything. Thank you, she said reflexively, and then began to cry. What am I going to do? Do? Go back home, wherever that is. Pick up your life again, whatever that might mean. But you said, when are you going to get it into your head that what I did was not a diagnostic? You mean you cured it? I mean, you're curing it right now. I explained it all to you before. You remember that now, don't you? Not altogether, but yes, surreptitiously, but not enough because he saw her. She felt under the sheet for the lump. It's still there. If I bopped you over the head with a bat, he said with slightly exaggerated simplicity, there would be a lump on it. It would be there tomorrow and the next day. The day after that, it might be smaller, and in a week you'd still be able to feel it, but it would be gone. Same thing here. At last she let the enormity of it touch her. A one-shot cure for cancer. Oh, God, he said harshly. I can tell by looking at you that I am going to have to listen to that speech again. Well, I won't. Startled, she said, What speech? The one about my duty to humanity. It comes in 2 phases and many textures. Phase 1 has to do with my duty to humanity and really means we could make a classic buck with it. Phase 2 deals solely with my duty to humanity, and I don't hear that one very often. Phase 2 utterly overlooks the reluctance humanity has to accept good things unless they arrive from accepted and respectable sources. Phase 1 is fully aware of this, but gets very rat-shrewd in figuring ways around it. She said, I don't, but could get no farther. The textures, he overrode her, are accompanied by the light of revelation, with or without religion and or mysticism, or they are cast sternly in the ethical philosophy mold, and aim to force me to surrender, and aim to force me to surrender through guilt mixed to some degree all the way up to total with compassion. But you, he said, aiming a long index finger at her, have robbed yourself of the choicest example of everything I have just said. If my assumptions had been right and you had gone to your friendly local Sawbones, and he had diagnosed cancer and referred you to a specialist, and he had done likewise and sent you to a colleague for consultation, and in a random panic you had fallen into my hands and been cured, and had gone back to your various doctors to report a miracle, do you know what you would have gotten from them? Spontaneous remission. That's what you'd have gotten. And it wouldn't be only doctors, he went on, with a sudden renewal of passion under which she quailed in her bed. Everybody has his own commercial. Your nutritionist would have nodded over his wheat germ or his macrobiotic rice cakes. Your priest would have dropped to his knees and looked at the sky. Your geneticist would have a pet theory about generation skipping and would assure you that your grandparents probably had spontaneous remissions too and never knew it. Please, she cried, but he shouted at her. Do you know what I am? I am an engineer twice over, mechanical and electrical, and I have a law degree. If you are foolish enough to tell anyone about what has happened here, which I hope you aren't, but if you are, I know how to protect myself. I could be jailed for practicing medicine without a license. You could have me up for assault because I stuck a needle into you, and even for kidnapping if you could prove I carried you in here from the lab. Nobody would give a damn that I had cured your cancer. You don't know who I am, do you? No, I don't even know your name, and I won't tell you. I don't know your name either. Oh, don't tell me. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. I wanted to be involved with your lump, and I was. I want it and you to be gone as soon as you're both up to it. Have I made myself absolutely clear? Just let me get dressed, she said tightly, and I'll leave right now. And that's where I'm going to stop because it's 2 o'clock and I've still got a decent amount of the story left. So I will continue at at 7 p.m. because it is now 1 a.m. Or 2 a.m., sorry. It started at 1. I'm easily confused. It is a little after 2, and I'm going to stop now, and I will continue the story and finish it tomorrow night and probably read part of another story of some kind as well. So we are midway through Slow Sculpture, Theodore Sturgeon, and I will return tomorrow night to finish it, or later tonight to finish it. Until then, or until I see you again, whenever that may be, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your friends and loved ones, save a little energy for those who might need your help that you might not ordinarily think of, and peace. Be good to yourself and others. I will see you real soon. Thank you for spending some time with me. Good night.